May 9, 1846. Earlier in the day, General Zachary Taylor handily defeats the Mexicans at Resaca de la Palma and forces them out of Texas. The Americans have already inflicted a major blow to the Mexican Army of the North, but Washington is still uninformed of the outbreak of hostilities in Texas. News of the Thornton affair reaches Washington on May 9th. Polk calls his cabinet into an emergency session. Unanimously, they support a declaration of war. The president also consults influential senators, John C. Calhoun and Thomas Hart Benton. Both senators tell Polk to settle the Oregon issue first. When John Slidell returns, he informs Polk that negotiations are off the table. Polk now sees war as the only alternative. The next day, Polk drafts a war message to Congress.
The cup of forbearance had been exhausted, even before the recent information from the frontier. Mexico has passed the boundary of the United States, has invaded our territory, and shed American blood upon the American soil. As war exists, and notwithstanding all our efforts to avoid it, exists by the act of Mexico herself. In further vindication of our rights and defense of our territory, I invoke the prompt action of Congress to recognize the existence of the war.
Despite Polk's zeal for war in Mexico, many Whigs fiercely contest an official declaration. To combat this, Polk couples the declaration of war with a bill to send military support to Taylor. Many Whigs, chiefly former President John Quincy Adams, argue that Polk has involved the country in an undeclared war. However, they could not refuse to support soldiers in the battlefield. When the House votes, the tally is 174 yea, 11 nay. In the Senate, the declaration is seamlessly approved, 40 yea, 2 nay. On May 13th, Polk signs the war legislation into law. The United States and Mexico are at war. Polk has extensive ambitions for the Mexican-American War. His main objective is to draw the southern border of the United States along the Rio Grande to El Paso, then along the 32nd parallel to the Pacific Ocean. President Polk assigns the U.S. military's most prominent leaders to lead the war against Mexico. Major General Zachary Taylor, a tough, old, experienced general known for commanding troops in the War of 1812, the Black Hawk War, and the Second Seminole War. General John E. Wool, a leader of a volunteer company in the War of 1812, and a keen administrator. Wool played a significant role in the Cherokee removal. Colonel Stephen Watts Kearny, a competent officer, first gaining experience in the War of 1812. Kearny led many exploratory expeditions to the American West. Kearny also owes his appointment to the influence of Senator Thomas Hart Benton. The Polk administration plans multiple routes of invasion into northern Mexico. First, Zachary Taylor is given an additional 20,000 volunteers and tasked with capturing Monterey, defended by the remnants of the Mexican Army of the North. Colonel Stephen Watts Kearny, stationed at Fort Leavenworth, is ordered to capture Santa Fe, the capital of Nuevo Mexico, with a detachment of 2,000 soldiers. After Nuevo Mexico is pacified, he is to take the most southern practicable route to capture Monterey and San Francisco in Mexican Alta California. General John E. Wool is tasked with capturing the Mexican city of Chihuahua. The United States raises 50,000 volunteer soldiers to fight the war in Mexico. These volunteers are split up into two divisions. The first commanded by William Orlando Butler, a Kentucky lawyer and veteran of the War of 1812. The second, commanded by Robert Patterson, a wealthy merchant and overly cautious commander. 6 politically appointed subordinate generals are called forward to lead segments of the volunteers. John A. Quitman, a highly respected Mississippi militia commander; James Shields, a brave, loyal Democrat who nearly fought a duel with Abraham Lincoln in 1842; Joseph Lane, an energetic and courageous Hoosier politician; Thomas Hamer, a promising Democratic congressman; Thomas Marshall, a prominent Kentucky state politician; Gideon Pillow, an influential political ally of President James K. Polk with limited military experience. Unrelated to the Polk administration's war plan, Captain John C. Fremont, renowned explorer and son-in-law of influential Senator Thomas Hart Benton, commands 60 topographical engineers on an exploratory expedition. In 1845, Fremont began his third westward expedition. He reaches the source of the Arkansas River. Instead of returning, Fremont blazes across Nevada towards Sutter's Fort in California. Although not officially stated, Fremont most likely has approval from Washington to stir sentiment for American interests in California due to the possibility of war. As Fremont stirs rebellious sentiment, Commandant General Jose Maria Castro besieges Fremont's camp for 3 days. Eventually, without bloodshed, Fremont retires to Oregon. When Fremont leaves on March 9th, Thomas Larkin, the American consul in California, requests an American warship to Monterey to protect American settlers if hostilities occur. Commodore John D. Sloat, based in Mazatlan, Mexico, orders the USS Portsmouth to Monterey. On May 8th, John C. Fremont receives a highly confidential message from Washington, most likely informing Fremont that a war with Mexico is imminent. Not much is known of the contents of the letter, but Fremont would later write,
I saw the way opening clear before me. War with Mexico was inevitable, and a grand opportunity presented itself to realize, in their fullest extent, the far-sighted views of Senator Benton.
Fremont departs for Northern California the next morning. Many settlements in Northern California harbor American settlers who entered the state without permission. These settlers grow increasingly anxious that the California authorities will expel them. Many American settlers consider resistance as John C. Fremont returns to California. In response to the potential uprising, Mexican General Jose Maria Castro gathers a force at Santa Clara. On June 10th, Fremont's presence inspires American settlers under Ezekiel Merritt to capture 170 horses owned by the Mexican government. On June 14th, Merritt and another group of settlers arrive at the house of Mexican General Mariano Guadalupe Vallejo in Sonoma. Vallejo attempts to negotiate terms with William Ide, the leader of the settlers. Instead, they take Vallejo and 3 officers hostage and send them to Fremont. Many of the settlers are uneasy about taking prisoners, but Ide rallies them with an impassioned speech.
Choose ye this day what you will be. We are robbers, or we must be conquerors.
That night, Ide writes a proclamation announcing his revolt. Over the following days, the rebels stitch together a flag with a star, a standing bear, and a red stripe. These rebels eventually gain the nickname Bear Flaggers. When Merritt brings his hostages to Fremont, Fremont offers support to Merritt. Fremont, either fearful of popular sentiment in California or seeing the potential advantages of holding the officers as hostages, supports the Bear Flaggers against the Mexicans. In response to this, General Castro sends 60 of his soldiers to confront the captors. But a small party of American settlers repels them on June 23rd. As the Bear Flaggers celebrate their victory, support for the rebellion grows stronger. Hearing of the battle, Fremont openly joins with the Bear Flaggers and rides to join their main force. Commodore Sloat finally docks at Monterey on July 1, 1846. However, Sloat proceeds cautiously and delays an attack on California. A few days later, he hears of Fremont's open support of the Bear Flag Revolt. Sloat assumes Fremont has knowledge of the American declaration of war on Mexico. Sloat ordered the seizure of Monterey and San Francisco to assist Fremont. On July 7th, Sloat lands 225 sailors and Marines on the beach of Monterey. The American flag is raised over the port city without a shot. On July 9th, Commander John B. Montgomery and 70 sailors and Marines wade towards the shore of San Francisco. San Francisco falls to the United States, also without a fight. Additionally, the Bear Flaggers raised the American flag in Sonoma, bringing the Bear Flag Republic to an end. Captain John C. Fremont learns of the capture of Monterey and San Francisco on July 10th. He immediately sets out to meet the American forces. On July 15th, Commodore Robert F. Stockton arrives in Monterey from Honolulu. Stockton, a competent, energetic, and glory-thirsty officer, will soon replace the 65-year-old Sloat, as his health has deteriorated from the stress of the recent months. Fremont raises the American flag over San Juan Bautista and arrives in Monterey on July 19th. Fremont and Sloat are eager to meet each other as they wish to gain justification for their previous actions. To Sloat's horror, he learns that Fremont joined the rebels without orders or knowledge of war. Partly due to his conversation with Fremont and also his failing health, Sloat transfers command to Stockton on July 29th and returns home. Stockton adds Fremont and his ex-Bear Flaggers to the American ranks and designates them the California Battalion, with Fremont as major. On June 30th, Colonel Kearny departs from Fort Leavenworth and begins a grueling, miserable 538-mile march to Fort Bend. On July 19th, Kearny learns that the populace of New Mexico is willing to accept occupation, but New Mexican leadership is attempting to conscript 2,300 soldiers to repel an American invasion. Kearny's Army of the West reaches Fort Bend on July 29th. They consolidate their forces and commence a march on Santa Fe on August 2nd. Kearny moves south through the Raton Pass, which is nearly untraversable. Due to logistical issues, he places his army on half rations. Kearny learns that Manuel Armijo, governor of Nuevo Mexico, is fortifying the Apache Canyon outside of Santa Fe. Armijo refuses to recognize the Rio Grande boundary. Instead, he seeks to negotiate with Kearny at the village of Las Vegas. When Kearny reaches Las Vegas on August 15th, Armijo is nowhere to be found. While Armijo is willing to fight the Americans, his soldiers and parts of his senior command are vehemently opposed to resistance. Shocked by his army's reluctance to fight, Armijo disbands his force and flees to Chihuahua. Kearny receives news of Armijo's departure and is invited to Santa Fe by the new acting governor. Kearny reaches the city on August 18th. The Army of the West had traveled 856 miles in less than 2 months. The army parades through the streets of Santa Fe. The soldiers raise the American flag over the governor's palace. The former governor of New Mexico begrudgingly accepts American annexation of New Mexico. With no possibility of resistance in Santa Fe, Kearny marches down the Rio Grande as far as Tome, asserting no further Mexican resistance and raising the American flag. On August 27th, Kearny establishes a civilian government for the newly conquered territory and appoints Charles Bent as the new territorial governor. Nevertheless, Kearny has successfully pacified New Mexico. He now turns his attention to the second half of his order, the capture of California. Kearny determines that only one regiment is needed to garrison pacified New Mexico. Kearny, now Brigadier General, will take the 300 men of his 1st Dragoons with him to California. Kearny sends Colonel Alexander Doniphan to support General John E. Wool's capture of Chihuahua. Colonel Sterling Price will keep his regiment of Missouri Volunteers in New Mexico. The Mormon Battalion, still making its way to Santa Fe, will follow Kearny to California as quickly as possible. Having solidified his hold on New Mexico, Kearny departs on another long march, this time to California on September 25th. Stockton takes a brash stance toward General Castro and threatens to drive him from California, extinguishing the last embers of a peaceful conquest. Stockton forms a plan to back up his ambitious proclamation. He will send the USS Cyane, carrying Fremont's men to San Diego. Once they land, they will ride inland to block a potential move southward by Castro. Stockton will sail south aboard the USS Congress and land a detachment of sailors and Marines at San Pedro to engage Castro. With this maneuver, Stockton intends to snare the small Californian force between his 2 larger units and smother Mexican resistance in California for good. Fremont and his soldiers land at San Diego on July 29th, and they remain until August 8th due to their inability to find horses. Stockton stations a small garrison at Santa Barbara and arrives at San Pedro on August 6 with 360 soldiers. General Castro, outnumbered and isolated, proposes a truce to Stockton. The Commodore kills any opportunity for negotiations. With no money, waning Californio's support, and just 100 armed soldiers, Castro has no other choice but to flee California. The Mexican government in California has fallen. Stockton reaches Los Angeles, a town of just 2,500, on August 13th. Fremont's detachment arrives just 1 hour later. Although clearly lacking authority, Stockton establishes a civilian government for the newly captured territory in hopes to ease tensions with its citizens. With all of California seemingly conquered, Stockton forms new objectives for his Pacific Squadron. He sets his sight on the Mexican city of Acapulco due to a threat to American commerce from Mexican privateers in the Pacific. But as Stockton takes his eye off California, the Mexicans look to pry it back from American hands. Hey, history buffs! If you love our detailed coverage of history here on Uncovered, consider supporting the channel on Patreon. As a patron, you'll be helping us cover the real costs of research, production, and storytelling. If you would like to see more frequent, detailed, high-quality history videos, head over to patreon.com/uncovered exclusive and help keep history uncovered.